have needed to be changed. Movie theater killings, all that stuff is all things that were preventable.
Have to change them.
All right.
Oh.
All right. Well, I'm recording, so you know, people come in late, they can watch. So, thank you for coming, guys. So like my last class, when like I did this when things got really hard, and only about like 6 people came. So this is week 1, and there's already like double, which is awesome. So what we're gonna go through tonight. So we'll go through the 2 activities. We'll start with the float activity, this one. So realistically, if you feel comfortable doing this one, you could do the easier homework. Like 100% do the easier homework. You should be all good with it. Really no worries. I recommend doing the easier homework just to practice. You don't have to hand that one in if you want to do the harder one. But this is great practice because you're not dealing with content. You're just dealing with straight up CSS. So that might work out. All right. So just going through the instructions for this one. So you can see in this one, we provided you guys with an HTML page already done. So like all the HTML is in place. So as far as we're concerned, you only really have to worry about getting all the styling handled. So we just need to know how to name things. So you really only have to refer to the HTML for names. So what we'll want to do, just reading through the instructions. Let's see. For anybody wondering what these tags are, these ampersand LT and ampersand GT, those are called, those are the greater than and less than signs. They're called like ASCII codes. So you'll see there's a whole mess of them. So like if I do like ampersand like bullet, that would make a bullet point. Let me make this a little bit bigger. If I made like ampersand amp, which is weird because it's redundant. Ampersand amp actually makes an ampersand. So that's what those are. They're not just like gobbledygook. All right, so it says we'll need to apply each of the following CSS properties at least once. So we really only wanted to worry about this stuff. We didn't want to use any positioning at all here. It's more just let's worry about floats. All right, so going to the CSS, we gave you guys some starter stuff. So you can see like how we handled the header already. Let me open this real quick so I can just refresh it. So you can see the header is already done for you, except that we need to make it a little bit bigger. So starting from the top, so what you see here, this ampersand, not ampersand, star right here, this asterisk, that's pretty much saying like it's a catch-all for the page. So it's saying like anything on the page, just give it a box sizing border box. So there's different settings for this. Typically you'll be doing border box. I've never used anything but border box, but I think there's like box sizing, I think it's like border box, or it's like padding or something else. You'll pretty much only be doing border box. So
Should that be on everything, like every CSS thing that we do?
Pretty much, like it kind of assumes it, to be honest. Like it does assume it. It always assumes border box. We're just being really explicit about it here because we want to make sure that we are doing it the right way, just in case you're on a browser that defaults to something different. I've never experienced a browser defaulting to something different, but it could happen. And then we just say everything on the page should have a text align center because we want everything to be centered. Nothing here is left aligned or right aligned, so it's all centered. So we don't need to like, it's better to do it for everything than to do like text align center here, text align center here, text align center here, because it gets really redundant. And if you want to change everything at once, you only want to change it once. You don't want to change it in 40 places because it's just really annoying. So So since we didn't give you guys like any real guidelines of sizing and stuff, you kind of have to eye it up with like font size and stuff like that. What we did give you here, all of these, hashtag CCC, 666, 888, blah, blah, blah. These are all of the hexadecimal codes for the backgrounds. So going through this, let me make this bigger. So we'll start off with the body. So as far as the body goes, we'll set some things that just like kind of carry along through the body. So every font has about the same size. So we'll give it a default font size. So we'll say font size, we'll say 24 pixels. Not too big, not really tiny. We'll give it a color of 333. Because like that's 333, 333, 333, 333. So for these three, we'll tell it otherwise. So like just because we did it here doesn't mean you can't override it when you get more specific. So it's a good way of kind of doing a catch-all, and then we can change it as we go for other things. All right, so now we have our header. So you can see here's our header tag. So we want it to look like this. So to make it look like that, we give it a padding of 20 pixels. That's what creates this space. Well, let me save it and do it here. So you can see like 20 pixels of padding, top and bottom. And I'm actually going to give this a line height too. I don't know if it's terribly necessary, but it's not a terrible thing to have. There we go. It makes it a little bit bigger. So
why don't you interview?
Excuse me? Good? All right. So we have our header. Has a padding of 20 pixels. It has a margin bottom of 20 pixels, which means that like force anything below it to at least be 20 pixels away from it. We give it a color of 333. Not too big of a deal here since we already did it to our body. I could honestly take this out right now. Hit refresh. And no big deal because it's going to pick up the body. And we need a background of CCC. So that's this background right here. So now we need to figure out these three right here. So let's try to do this like bit by bit. So you can see that we have something here that'll handle every section tag. So section, 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 and then this whole big light gray box is another section. So do you guys think that there's something I can set for all of them that'll actually work? Any type of like spacing or anything like that?
That would make all of them work, you said?
Yeah, so like all four of these, like section, 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 and section. So there's like something that carries through to all of them.
Can we like clear them?
So we don't really need to clear them, but they all do have padding. So we can give them all padding because you can see like that's about 20 pixels from like here to here, 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels, and then like same thing with all of these. So instead of explicitly saying 20 pixels in every single place, we'll just do it once. So we'll say padding 20 pixels. And then here, you can see right here, this white space. There's white space here. There's white space here. So we'll just give it a generic margin bottom, 20 pixels. So the reason we do this is because I don't want to say give this a 20 pixels, give this a 20 pixel, give this a 20 pixel, and give this a 20 pixel, when I can say all of these share a tag. So I might as well apply it to all of them at once in one CSS line.
Oh, so if you go under like section, it'll do it for all the sections because it already says section.
Yeah, so like this applies it to anything with a section HTML tag.
Oh, it'll just recognize the similarity with the section name.
Not even, yeah, so like, yeah, section, like all of these say section.
Okay.
And like, if we needed to override it, we can do that when we get more specific with IDs. Like, just because this is a section with an ID of left, I can give left a property that says, like, maybe I wanted to give this left padding like 100. And that would say, okay, like, we know you're a section, but you also have this. And we're going to care more about this. We're going to give this precedence
Right.
when it comes down to like how we actually render things.
Okay.
So here, I'm just going to give it a general background color of CCC. We'll override them and a few of them. But like a lot of times what you'll end up finding that you want to do is that you'll set like generic styles. Like we'll say like, we just want all sections to have this style no matter what. And then if we need to get more detailed in certain sections, then we'll apply it as needed to those certain sections. Just that way, God forbid something breaks, you can really not worry about like it looking like crap. All right, so now we have this section with an ID of left, this one with middle, and this one of right. Hold on, let me turn off my phone. So we need all three of these to be as close to 100% as possible. And they all have different background colors. Well, these two have the same background color, but this one's different. And they have a different font color. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do color FFF. I could also say color white just because it knows what the color white is. But I'm going to give it the color FFF for white. I'm going to give it a background color of 666. I'm going to give it a width. And I'm going to do the width in a percentage because I want it to fill up like, I want each one to be 33.3% of the page. Obviously, that won't be like a pure 100%, but we'll get as close as we can. And lastly, since we need to stop it from being a block level element, we need to do it with a float left. And since the three of these pretty much behave the same, I'm just going to copy and paste these. You'll find that a lot of the work you do is mostly copying and pasting from other work you've done, and there's nothing wrong with that. To be honest, it's preferable because you'll end up being faster. The middle, though, has a different background color, so I'm just going to change that to 888. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to check it out, and it's looking good so far. So does anybody have any questions so far?
I have one.
Yeah.
So why are you using section instead of like a div?
You could use div. You could totally use div here. It's really just like semantics. Like I could change this all to div, and it'll be fine.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's really like, to be honest, I can't even explain like a real preference because it is that like inconsequential to change it to a div. So if you're more comfortable doing divs, totally go for it. I mean, like, to be honest, this is how we teach it. But when I code things, I never use sections. I never use headers. I never use footers. I use divs for everything. So if that's how you want to do it, totally go that way. Because that's like how most people do it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be too concerned with that. Like if like on the homework you did it all with divs, I would not, nobody would yell at you for doing that because it's not like, there's nothing wrong with it. To be honest, divs may make more sense at the end of the day. Because like sections are, I don't know, they are what they are. They're just divs with like fancier names. All right, so these three are all set. They're all good here. So now what I need to do is I need to start thinking about this full div right here, or this full section. So a couple things I want to do. I do want to make sure it fills up the full width of the page. So I'm going to give it a width of 100%. I'm going to, this might not be 100% necessary, but I'm going to say like, if there's overflow content, handle it how the browser wants to handle it. So by sending it to auto, we're going to kind of leave it in the browser's hands. There are other methods. We can do like overflow, like scroll, saying like if there's overflow, don't make it any bigger than it needs to be, but put like a scroll bar within the div to like scroll within it. Kind of looks ugly at times. You can do overflow hidden to just like out and out say, if there's overflow, we don't care. Just don't show it. But in this case, we're going to say auto, and we'll let the browser kind of handle it the way it wants to handle it. So we're going to give it overflow auto. We're going to give it a background color of EEE. We need it to look like that. And you can see right now that there's just nothing in there right now. So like we have to figure this out. So we are going to go ahead and worry about that. And one more thing I want to do, just in case we have a really weird browser issue, I'm going to add a clear to it. Because I wanted to make sure that it, no matter what, comes down below these three, since we did float these. So like, God forbid, we had a huge browser. This, I want to make sure that this always comes in below it. All right, so now, let's see. Let's worry about this blue area. So this blue area, I'm going to give it padding. I'm going to say 20 pixels again. So I'm going to give it some nice space between the edge of the blue and the actual text. I also want to give it a margin. I want it to be a little bit away from here just to create some artificial space. So I'll give it a margin top of 20 pixels. And then I'm going to give it a background color of 6EA3DA. There we go. All right, hit save. All right, so that section's all good. Good to go there. So you can see here, since we gave all sections of padding of 20 pixels, that this div can't come to the edges, right? Because like the section it's in has a padding of 20 pixels. So it's going to try to fill up as much space as possible in the parent as far as like the parent's concerned with the rules it's given it. Is that making sense? Cool. All right. So now let's worry about this aside. So this one's going to be a little bit weird. We're going to have to like artificially give it some height just to kind of make it look like the demo. A lot of times you're not going to have to worry about giving something a height. I really like hard coding heights is so bizarre because it just doesn't work well across different browser sizes or mobile and stuff like that because everything is different now. So this is, I don't want to say it's hacky, but a lot of times you're not going to end up doing this in the real world. So first thing I want to do, so I do want to float it left because I wanted to ignore the space that this takes up and kind of just want it to be where it needs to be. So it's going to basically float over this. So We're going to float it left. We're going to give it a width of about, I don't know, 33%. You could, I don't know, you can do this however you want to. Width of 33%. I'm going to artificially give it a height of 200 pixels. I'm going to give it a margin left of about 30 pixels. So you can see here I need about that much space. Because like when you think about it, as far as this container is concerned, this is the leftmost place that this container is going to allow content to be in, right? The edge of this blue, because of the padding we gave to it. So we needed 30 pixels off of this. And I'm just figuring 30 pixels because this is a little bit more than this. And that's about 20 pixels. So we'll just go 30. Give it a background color of FFF. I think it says there's a border, but I am not seeing it. There's kind of a border. Whatever, I'll just make a border. Border, 1 pixel, solid. I'll give it a black border just to make it pop out a little bit. All right, so hit save, hit refresh, and there we go. Oh, it's hugging the top. I don't really like that. Okay. Cool. Awesome. So one thing you'll notice is that like the other day when I had you guys, or yesterday when I had you guys add up the total width. So it's like when you have a width of 400 pixels and you have a margin, then you have padding, you have all that stuff, it actually adds to the total width. Not as much the case when you use percentages in your width, because percentages are going to be, this percentage is going to be like a fraction of the page. You know, it's going to be whatever the page needs it to be at the time. 400 pixels wide here is going to be 400 pixels wide the same here, right? So like that doesn't change based on that. So that's why you'll find that like working with percentages is a little bit weirder, but that's what makes things responsive. So like whenever you, like when we get into Bootstrap next week, you'll see that everything they do is in percentages because that's how they create responsive things. So does anybody have any questions so far?
I have a question, but it's semi-connected. It's more about like trying to do a git reset because whatever I mess around with to try to make that whole header thing, just screwed everything else up. So I'm trying to go back to like my last commit.
Okay.
It's not working.
Okay, so so what you can do, did you do a git push?
No.
Okay, so what you can do is, let me go here real quick. Make this a little bit bigger. So if like you type in git logs.
Yep.
It's git log, sorry. So you can see here, like if I do git log, it tells you everything that I've done so far. You can do a git revert.
Oh, was that, maybe I was doing git reset and that wasn't right. So git revert,
Yeah, so let me pull this up. I don't want to misspeak.
Yeah, see that git reset? That's what I tried to do.
Yeah, git reset's a little bit scarier.
Definitely hit it a couple times, but nothing seemed to happen. So
Yeah. Let me go to, there's so many places to do this. Okay. Hard delete unpublished commits, git reset hard. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to get the list of commits on.
What was the other thing you said you were doing? Yeah, tag.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a whole list?
No, I think you saw Fizzy. Actually, I don't know.
Look.
Life. I want to sleep.
So it seems like you can do a git revert.
Okay, do I have to do anything else or just hit get revert?
You do git revert, and then so you have to do a git log.
Yep.
That'll print out like these commit codes.
Mm-hmm.
So then you do a git, so like copy one of these codes, like whatever code is the one that you want to get back to.
Okay.
So you can see like each one goes in line with whatever you committed.
Yep.
So then like you would do git revert. Let me see. Yeah, that should be okay. Git revert, and then you can do just paste the code in.
Revert failed. Please.
Oh, really?
Says please commit your changes or stash them before you merge.
Oh, okay. So do a git stash first. That'll stash all the things you've done since then.
Okay.
And then you can try doing the git revert again. So just hit the up arrow a couple of times. That'll go through your command line history.
Okay. This reverts commit. Please enter the commit message for your changes. Lines starting with hashtag will be ignored and an empty message aborts the commit.
Oh, okay. It entered Vim mode. Okay. Type in :quit. Do like :quit, hit enter.
It won't let me type anything.
Then hit Control-C. Did that do anything?
Now I can move. It's saying revert fix header, which is where I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's trying to like bring you back to another commit message. So now if you type in :quit and hit enter, it should bring you back.
Oh. Okay.
So you should probably be back now. It's kind of hard to...
Just if I go to VS Code?
Yeah, I would see if like the code's the way you want it to be.
Yep. Close enough.
Okay. Cool. All right, so is everybody's okay and up to speed with this stuff right now? They're kind of understanding it?
No.
By its very nature, this is kind of jacked up looking, like overflowing content and stuff. Don't think that this is going to be like 100% how you do things all the time. It's more of showing off how it can work. So last thing we need to do is style up this footer. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to give it a background of CCC. I'm going to give it padding of 20 pixels again. And I'm going to make sure it just clears both. So I want to make sure it clears this. Anything that's floated left, anything that's floated right above it, I want it to come below it. And there we go. So it should be all good.
So usually when you put clear, it just makes it go beneath it instead of on top of it or next to it.
Yeah, it kind of just says like, hey, like we know that there's some stuff that's floated above us, but if we don't tell it otherwise, there might be situations where it'll ignore it and it'll pretty much like come up at the same top as it. Like its top axis will match up.
Okay.
So yeah, so the clear both is kind of like a nice safe way of saying, hey, let's guarantee that you're going to come down below this because we might not know when things are floated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the aside float was what brought it to the top?
the asides float left basically said ignore anything else that you have in here, and like now let's just make it float within its container.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it like I said, it's really weird because it's like you're telling things that are supposed to have rules and telling them not to have rules anymore. All right, so that's the float activity. Like I said, if you can reasonably get your head around this, you can probably do the easier homework. I definitely recommend doing it just for practice, because you might end up on job interviews where they say don't use Bootstrap. I would tell them I probably wouldn't want to work there, but but it might come up. So does anybody have questions on this before we move to the position activity?
Yeah. Why didn't you float the right one to the right with the left, middle, and right?
So you could have floated it right. But what I want to make sure is, like, since this 33.3 and 33.3 and 33.3 aren't like a total
100%.
Yeah, 100%. Like if I did this right, there might be like, yeah, see that like, little pixel came in?
Okay.
Yeah, so like that's kind of a case-to-case basis. There's going to be situations where you want to float things right, but to like, if you want things to butt up against each other on one line, typically floating them all left would make them do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's going to be times where you want to say like, no, you go over to the left, you go over to the right, be on the same like horizontal plane, but don't touch each other. So there'll be situations where that arises.
Hey Alex, Chitra here, joined late. Could you explain clear?
Yeah, so what clear does is that it basically says, so like we cleared the footer, right? So it's saying like, hey, we have some things that are floated up above us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to, like, by the very nature of floating, it's basically taking it out of flow. So as far as like what it wants to do, as far as like this, you've taken up this much space and we want to account for that. Doing a float kind of says, don't account for that anymore. Anything below it, like, should ignore the space that it's taken up. So by doing a clear both, we're basically saying, hey, make sure it clears anything that's floated left and anything that's floated right. We want to make sure that it does come below it.
So it's saying the footer should not be right below the div. It should go outside of the box and be at the bottom of the float, the entire section. Is that what the clear is?
So it's like you saw, like, I can pull the clear out and it actually works okay. There's going to be situations where like you would need the clear, but we're basically, by adding a clear here, we're guaranteeing that this footer div is going to definitely come down below everything.
Okay.
And make sure that it adheres to like flow, because when you're dealing with floats, you're taking things out of flow. Any space that it's trying to reserve may not reserve the space anymore. And while it won't affect the elements above it, it'll totally affect the elements below it. So we just need to make sure that we like give rules back to it. It's like we took this aside, we took it out of flow, and we really messed it up as far as that, like as far as the page is concerned. It's like confused as far as what space is actually reserved anymore. So now we're telling this like, hey, reserve some space for it. Like we want it to be okay now.
Okay.
This one, in my opinion, this one's a lot harder than position. Floating's so much weirder than positioning. I find positioning to be like really easy to understand and grasp when you break it down. Floats do the weirdest thing in the world. Floats, like, I don't have that much hair, but like probably because of dealing with floats. Because I used to have to code separate style sheets just for Internet Explorer 6 because it would not handle anything. And I had customers that were like, "Oh, like you have to."
You listen to the animal.
Sorry, that was my Alexa.
Oh, nice.
All right. She like
There was a Saturday Night Live sketch the other night that was doing the echo, and it kept setting off my echo.
I have 3 echoes in the house now. My mom, my dad, I have one now. It's getting ridiculous. So someone's gonna have to change it. My dad wants to name it Irving. He's gonna like he wants to hack into it and change it to Irving. So I'll let you know about that one.
Yeah, see if you can get that to work.
I think he's gonna be able to do it.
Nice.
So Alex, I thought I had a good handle on positioning for relative, but it turns out I don't.
Okay, so all right.
What
So
I'm confused by is really like how do you associate the one div with the parent div? Because for some reason, like when I set up like a test, it'll show up in a certain location in a div I set up, but in practical cases when I try and put it as like a sibling, it doesn't kind of show up in that same spot. So I know I'm somewhere.
I gotcha. Yeah. So we're gonna get into the position one. Any questions on the floats before we move on to positioning?
Yeah, could you scroll back up? Let me see the code a little bit, please.
Yeah, sure. Like which part?
That's fine, right there left.
Yeah, you got it.
No, I'll just scroll. I'm seeing body and header right now. Just scroll up to left.
What do you want to do?
Scroll up to left. The CSS for left.
Oh, for left. I gotcha.
Yeah, right there.
And I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
On the write-up, it said you need to know about overflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay.
So it probably doesn't come into play here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it does. Never mind. So here's what happens. So I turned off overflow.
Okay.
And because I floated this aside,
Okay.
I took it out of flow, right? So that means like, yeah, it lives inside of this section, but the second I float it and I give it a height bigger than what this section it lives in wants to be,
Okay.
it's gonna get all jacked up looking. So what I need to do is I add this little property here called overflow auto.
Mm-hmm.
So what this does is it says, okay, if you have any content that's going to be bigger than what you are computed to be, just make yourself bigger to like handle it.
Can you show us what it looks like when you have it without that?
Yeah, this is what it looks like when I have it without.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, I see that. It gets all messed up.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. So for the full, if I mention the width and height, 250 for the full, the height is 250, then I don't need the overflow, right? Like I had it like that and it worked, so I did not need the overflow.
So like I said, like if you know flat out that it's going to be a certain height, then that's okay. Most of the time you're not going to know how much height you're going to need, right? So say like one, so because the way you have to think about it is that you have to design in terms of like variable content. So one time I could throw one paragraph at you and you can allot enough height and you can hard code like, all right, I think it's going to need 200 pixels, right? So that's cool.
Okay.
But like, what if I throw 5 paragraphs at you? So what are you going to like, that's going to take up more space. So by instead of giving this a height, we're going to say, hey, just grow to whatever we need you to be at the time.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So by doing overflow auto, if I change one of its children, in this case, the aside is one of its children, I'll make it like 600 pixels, right?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
It now grows with it.
Okay.
Because the second you give something like a hard height, like a hard dimensioned height, it gets a little hairy with trying to deal with variable content. And that'll happen often with like image sizes might be different depending on what your sources are, paragraphs. So especially when you're dealing with heights, try to be as like loose as possible because it's going to need to grow and shrink as your needs grow and shrink. Widths you can be a little bit more explicit about. you'll usually explicitly set widths. You'll probably never explicitly set a height because it's just you can't really account for like everything that you'll have to deal with, especially when you're going across mobile and your watch at this point, like anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's why we do overflow auto. I can do I think I can do scroll. Yeah, I can do scroll. That's another setting for overflow, which didn't. Oh, it scrolls left and right. I was gonna say scroll. Didn't do anything. Okay, there's other things I can do, but it's all good. So that's why we do overflow. It's just it's a way of like telling a parent to like, hey, you may have content inside of you that's gonna grow beyond your needs, or like what you are initially set to do. So we want you to handle it as needed, instead of, because like the last thing you'll want to do is go back into here and start tinkering with heights every time you have a different size.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea is like you want to leverage the browser to fill in the blanks for you as much as possible in those cases, because at the end of the day, they'll handle it better than we can.
Okay.
Awesome. So anybody have any other questions on this one? And we will move on to our other one, our positions. Cool. All right, so let me close this. So we needed to build something that looked like this. Didn't have to 100%, be the same widths and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to do, but I'll try to get it close. So here, I'm going to make an index.html file. And then here, I'm going to make an assets folder. Inside that assets folder, now I can be like really organized, which I'll do. I'll make a CSS folder. Inside of the CSS folder, I'll make a style.css file. All right, so wrong one. There we go. So I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this basically by like just looking at it. So what I can do here, type in just HTML5. Let me Slack this out to you. Emmet, cheat sheet. So what VS Code comes with something called Emmet. So Emmet's like a short code generator. So like, I know this is tiny as hell, but you can type these things into your VS Code as long as it's like marked down as an HTML file. And once you hit tab, it'll actually create things for you. So you'll see right here, I'll do HTML5, hit tab, and it scaffolds out my file for me. Let me Slack it. I'm going to Slack it out to you guys. So it's really helpful. I'm not saying you have to memorize all of these codes immediately. It'll just kind of come. So once I have my code all set up, I'll just say position exercise. So one more thing I need to do is I need to bring in my style sheet. So I'm going to do link CSS, hit tab. So this is wrong, obviously. It tries to auto-complete it for me. That's wrong. It's not at the style.css is not at that level. So how would I make this find my style.css, which is actually in assets and CSS?
//
Assets/CSS/style.
Yeah. Because I'm right here. So assets and index are on the same level. I need to go down into assets. Here, there's a CSS folder. I need to go down into CSS, and here's style.css. So if you want to be really sure, you can do /, which is essentially saying start where you are, then look in assets, then look in CSS, then look in then pick up style.css. All right, so there's a few ways you can do this. I'm going to do it all in one container div. So using Emmet, I'll show you, like if I wanted to make a div right now that had a class of container, you can actually just type in div.container and it creates it. Really awesome. So I guess first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this div right here inside of it. So I'm going to give it an ID of fixed so I know how to access it. I'm only going to have one of them. So div, since it's an ID, use a hashtag. And that creates it for you. So I'm going to put in this little div tag, and I'm going to say position fixed. So I'll just say ampersand LT div ampersand GT. Then I'm going to do a break tag, and I'm going to say position fixed. So that'll make up here when I end up styling it. Next thing I want to do is I want to add, I'm assuming that says heading. So I'm going to say H1 heading. Now I need to get some Greek text or some Latin text. So I'm going to do a paragraph tag. And then I'm just going to, I have something installed where I can just put in Greek text on the fly instead of going to like lipsum.com. So I'm going to pull it up here. I don't know if you guys have it. No, you don't. So I downloaded Hipsum, hit enter, and it created this nice placeholder text for me. So I have all this placeholder text inside of this these p tags. Everything's all set here. So now I want to make another div right here that has a position of relative. So I'm pretty much just going to copy and paste this. Give this one an ID of relative. And then inside of this relative div, I'm going to put another div inside of it called absolute. Because I want this div to be positioned absolutely within this div. So same idea, just paste it in. Absolute. So that handles that middle section. Below it, I'm just going to add some more dummy copy. So I'm going to do a little copy pasta. So that should be it as far as the HTML goes. So is everybody okay with how I set this up HTML-wise?
Yeah, just so I'm 100% clear, what exactly does LT and GT do again? Just so
yeah, so these are called like ASCII codes. So like there's a whole mess of them. They're just like symbols.
Right.
That like when they're rendered, because like when you think about it, the greater than and less than signs are already kind of used in the HTML syntax.
Right.
So I don't want.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's
yeah. So I don't want to confuse that by doing an open and closing tag right here, especially when it's wrapped around the word div, right?
Right.
Like it's going to pick up an opening and closing tag
Right.
around div, and it's going to say, like, oh, you just opened a div. So what's going on?
I just put two and two together that it's less than and greater than, so
Yeah.
I understand that now.
Yeah. So like,
Do you mind slacking the ASCII code?
Yeah, I'm going to slack this out now too.
Thanks. Awesome.
Yeah, because there's like a whole mess of these.
Yeah. I'm not trying to memorize those.
No, nor should you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trying to find the copyright symbol on the laptop, not fun.
What do you say, the copyright one?
On the laptop, I was trying for the longest time. The flashes on the keyboard.
Yeah, I think that was the first one I learned, the copyright one, when I had to start doing like email blasts back in the day. So does anybody have any questions on like how I've structured the HTML in this?
No.
Cool. So the way you should think about this when you look at this, so like all of this lives in one div. That div is obviously not 100% of the width of the page, right? So we need to kind of put it in something so we can make it not be 100% of the page. This, we can put this div anywhere, right? Because it's fixed. Like the second when you give it the attribute of position fixed, it'll say, I don't care where I live. I now belong to the browser window. That's pretty much all you need to worry about. This div being relative, we want it to come in relatively to like where it falls in flow, right? So it comes in after a paragraph. So we want it to come in the flow of our document. Then inside of that, we have an absolutely positioned div because we want it to be absolutely positioned within the parent div that it's in. So like within here. So where fixed is going to be positioned based on wherever the browser window is, and it does not care about like any parents or sibling HTML elements. It doesn't care about any of that. It's just like, it does not care. Absolutely positioned divs care 100% about what they live inside of. So this div lives inside of this div. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to go into my style.css. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give it just a generic like override. Just make sure that my friends are watching the WWE Royal Rumble and I have like money on it. So we do it every year where it's like we just get random numbers and that depends on like the entrant that you get. I always get like the worst people, like the people that get kicked out in a second, but it's beside the point. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I set my box sizing to be based on the border box. So there's different settings, like I said before, where it would size the images based on like where you tell the box to end. I want to make sure that it knows that my boxes end at the border. So like the margins start at the border and all that stuff. Like don't size it anywhere else. Because there's another one where it's like content box where everything's sized based on the content and things get a little weird there. So border box is 99% of the time going to be how you end up sizing things. And like I said before, pretty sure your browser picks up on it by default. I'm being explicit because I think being explicit's a little bit of a safer way to be. All right, so now I'm going to apply something to all of the body. So everything inside of here. So I'm going to say font family. I guess I don't know. I'm going to say Georgia. I don't know. I don't want it to be Times New Roman. I'm going to say Georgia. I'm going to give it a font size of 16 pixels just to be a little bit bigger. Give it a line height of like 20 pixels. I guess I should open this just to make sure I'm like going in the right direction. All right. Maybe make that a little bit bigger on both ends. There we go. That's nicer. All right. So now I want to actually size up where all the content lives. So this container that I created. So I'm going to say .container. I'm going to give it a width of 960 pixels, which is like in 2018 standards is like really narrow. But I'm just kind of like exaggerating to make a point here as far as our sizing goes. 960 like used to be the standard, like your website should never be wider than 960 because we lived in the Stone Age, but now it's different. So I'm going to give it a width, and I'm going to give it a margin of 0 top and bottom, but I want it to be centered, so I'm going to give it auto for left and right. That means it's going to automatically fill in the left and right hand sides, centering all of the content. Hit save, refresh, and there we go. Awesome.
Hey, Alex, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So when you put auto on, what happens if the div has like 2 images or like three gaps, right? And 2 items? Like, is it just doing, like, how does it calculate the automatic on the one side that might have something bordering?
So like, it's just going to do it based on the, like you're saying if there's something like over here already?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, like, right, so like, I get it, like if there's one thing in a row, right, it's going to figure out the space on both sides. What happens if you have 2 things in a row, right? So you technically have 3 gaps in 2 things.
Right, so
on object
you set it up correctly where like it'll fill in auto margin based on the space it's given, right? So it won't be like auto based on the page. It's going to be auto based on the container.
That's what my question. So it's doing it based on the parent div?
Yeah, so like whatever it's living inside of. In this case, it's living inside of body. So body's going to be, like unless I said body should only be so many pixels wide, then it'll be a little bit of a different story. So if you have a container div that's inside of something else, and like you give it an auto and it's going to be less than that, then it'll do it based on whatever that's inside of. That make sense?
Yeah, it does. I still don't know how to do it with 2 things in a row, but I'll cross that bridge.
Okay.
Work is kind of
Alex, why didn't you put the
portfolio?
Sorry.
What do you say, Gatry?
Why didn't you put the width in the body instead of in the container, in the div container?
I could have. It really depends on what you want to do. I typically never mess with like the width of the body.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially these days with modern like web design, like full width. Like at some point you're going to want something to be full width more often than not. So it's better off to apply like margins and like widths and boundaries and stuff like that to like other elements and not the whole body itself.
Okay, understand.
Yeah, because like another idea about this is like, what if I wanted to give the entire body a background image, and I only said like be, 800 pixels wide? Then like there's gonna be like these weird white spaces right here.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like you could if you wanted to. There's nothing wrong with it. It really does depend on like the design that you're going to be going towards. But most of the time you'll want to leave like the dimensions of the body as like agnostic as humanly possible, and then make whatever's inside of it have rules.
Okay, understand.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, back to the idea that it's associating with the parent. Could you use this with having 2 images on a row? I can't quite visualize. So you got this one big parent, right?
Yeah.
I guess if it's taking the distance, it's going to try and put it in the middle, but there's another object there next to it.
Yeah, so let me Let me do something real quick. I'm gonna mess with this in Chrome Inspector a little bit. So like, all right, make this a little bit bigger. So let's say, all right, I'm gonna give this particular p tag, I'm gonna float it left with, I'm gonna say like 45%. I'm going to get rid of this entirely. I don't want to worry. I don't want to deal with that right now. And I'm going to give this one let's say float right. You know what, I'll give this one 45% too. Give it a little more space. I'm going to say margin 0. Maybe just a little bit. It's a little bit hard. You know what? This might be a bad situation for this. I'm like trying to force something that isn't 100% there.
And I don't want to stop your flow too. I can always follow up on this later. But
yeah, that kind of stuff makes more sense when we actually get into Bootstrap, because Bootstrap has it set up where like it'll make these like things right now that are weird will make a lot more sense with Bootstrap, which is it's weird to say, but like the way that Bootstrap has it set up is kind of like made for that idea. Yeah. Yeah, so next thing I want to do is I'll just go ahead and fix this right now. I'll do this thing. So I called it fixed. And I'm going to say, I don't know, I'm totally going to like eye this one up. I'm going to say heading like 50 pixels. Background, I don't know. I'm making it up. It's not going to be this. 888. Text align centered. A position of fixed. And I want it to be left 0 and top 0. So remember, the second you fix something, it's going to fix it to the browser window. So I want it to be as far left as humanly possible, which will be 0. And I want it to be as far up to the top as possible, which is 0. So I'm going to hit save. And there you go. So let me make this a little bit smaller. Yep, so it comes in over like that at left 0 and top 0. If I made this like 10, you can see it comes in from the top and left 10 pixels. And I'll give this a little bit more space. Cool. So any questions on this one, the fixed one? I think fixed is like the easiest one because you kind of know that it's like the second you give it a fixed, you're pretty much telling it like, hey, stop caring about the rest of the page and like do your own thing based on the window, which is like oddly empowering of it because it can do whatever it wants.
Alex, couldn't you put the position fixed left and top in one line of code instead of 3 lines, which left and top?
So no, it's not like margin.
Okay.
Yeah. Like position's its own thing. But it's not like margin where I can just say like position space. I actually have to explicitly say left, right, top, and bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not sure everybody heard yesterday because I said it like during the activity, but left, top, right, and bottom properties do not work by default. Like you have to give it a position fixed, absolute, or relative for them to actually work. Like if I got rid of this right now, it would have no idea what left and top is. It would not care. See? Just like did its own thing.
Right.
So that position fix actually gives these two power. All right, so I'm going to go into this one right now. So this relative one. Okay. Relative. So I'm going to give it a position of relative. So like when you give something a position of relative, it's going to start off where it thinks it should be starting off, right? So it's like if it was static and it started off right here where it thinks it should start off based on the flow of the page, relative is going to be the same exact thing unless you tell it otherwise. So like you would tell it otherwise by doing that top, left, right, and bottom.
So relative is going to start in the same spot as static.
Yeah, exactly. It'll start at the same spot as static. The only difference is you can actually move it with left, right, top, and bottom properties if you want to. But it'll move relatively to like where it wanted to start.
Okay. And is it associated with a parent or not at all? It's just relative to itself. I guess that's the where I'm getting.
Yeah, so it's like it's relative to like the flow, right? So it's going to look here and it's going to say, hey, you came in right here. Where do you actually end? So like since you are coming in below it, I need to be relative to where this p tag actually ends, where the space that this p tag wants to take up finishes taking up space. So like if you see,
so it's relative to the end of the element
before it, yeah. So it's like it's relative to its sibling, where the p tag in this situation would be its sibling. That's how it knows kind of like where to start off from. That's where it gets its like, yeah, it's where it gets its like initial position from.
So, right. So I guess I was under the mistaken that it was relative to like the parent, like we had a div wrapped around this whole thing, like body.
Well, so it would be if it was the first one.
If it was the first, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So Samathi just asked, is relative to its static position? Yeah, because in its static position, it would want to start right here. So like if you look right here, where does this one end? You could see like where, oh, that's annoying. Get out of this mode. Okay, never mind. There we go. So you can see like how this one ends right there with the orange. It's going to want to start at the end of that orange, below that orange. So that's like where it's going to relatively start.
Okay.
So like you'll notice that I just gave it a position of relative and I hit save and I refreshed it. Didn't do anything, right? Like it doesn't need to do anything. By its very nature, like relative starts off in the exact same way as static does until you tell it otherwise. So if I did like relative and I said top 100 pixels, that's going to be different, right? Because like now I'm saying start where you would start and move it. But by its very nature, it'll start where it needs to start. So you don't really have to worry about it too much. So going back off of what I need to model this off of. All right, so I need to center the text. Center, I'm going to say background of CCC. I'll do make it a little bit lighter. I'll give it padding because I don't want this to be like butt up against it. So I'm going to say like 20 pixels. And in this case, I am going to give it a mock height. I'm going to say 200 pixels just to like give it some space. So now, awesome. Gives me all the space I need. Everything comes in within the flow still. So like relative doesn't, unless I tell it to like do something left, right, bottom, or top, it'll stay in flow by its very nature. All right, so last thing I want to do is mess with my absolute div. So I want to take this div that lives inside of here and make it position to the bottom, like anchor it to the bottom of this div, and kind of bust it out of here. So I'm going to do absolute. I'm going to say position absolute. So I'm going to say bottom 0 because I want it to be here. I'm going to say right. I'm just going to say like negative 30 pixels or so. I want it just where this would be right 0, this line right here. I want to pull it out. Give it a background of something darker than what it lives inside of. So I'll say 888 again. Yeah, that works. 888. And then I'll give it some padding. I'll give this about 20 pixels. And I'll give it a width of like 400 pixels just to give it some space to show it off. All right, hit save, refresh, and there you go. So now you can see here, it's absolutely positioned within its parent div, right? So I said absolutely be at the bottom, bottom 0, and absolutely be negative 30 pixels off of the right axis, which means overflow it out to the right.
So just to be clear, so absolute is relative to a parent div, so therefore you have to have relative position container wrapped around it.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
Alex, you see how you give it a negative 30 and it goes to the right. Does that 30 goes outside of the parent div, being that the relative position is already fitting most of the container?
Yeah, so you're saying like that this technically not only breaks out of the relative div, it even breaks out of the container, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's what happens. I would have to say, like if I said here,
overflow.
You see how like I did overflow hidden and all of a sudden this is gone.
Okay.
That's how that kind of works. Like, so by its very nature, it's going to show overflowing content right here.
Okay.
So it's kind of just letting it happen.
So Alex, the same kind of question asked a little bit differently. Can absolute live without a container that has position relative on the page?
No, so it's going to look for the position of whatever its parent is. So like I'll take out relative right here. So like taking out relative.
You have to have it inside a relative container.
Yeah, so like relative here, that doesn't really matter as far as flow goes, right? Like I took relative out and this looks the same because it still works in flow. But as far as like positioning its children within it, we need to say that this is relative to it. So you can see I took relative out and all of a sudden this is negative 30 to the right of what the browser window wants. And it's at 0 of where the browser window wants.
Okay, so without the relative, it becomes absolute to the body tag.
Yeah, well, like whatever the nearest positioned tag is.
Okay.
So like in this
so it's
case,
almost like a relative tag, like anchors it.
Yeah, pretty much. It makes everything work relatively off of it. All of its children work relatively off of it. I know, it's really weird.
Okay.
Like the absolute is the relative is the way.
Dude, it took me years to like actually understand what the hell happened. Like, so we do not expect everybody to feel great about this on day 3, because it's like, I don't want to say that this is useless, but I'm going to tell you right now, after this week, I'm going to say you will not have to do this. And you're gonna find that happen a lot in here. We're gonna do something one week, and then the next week I'm gonna say, by the way, I'm about to make this really easier for you, and we're gonna do it a different way. But to understand how Bootstrap works, we have to understand why this works. So
would it be helpful to wait like until after Monday or Wednesday's class to do the homework if we're completely lost?
I mean, I would definitely start it. I would get as much.
We're started, but I like can't get it
But
how I
most
want
of
it.
probably what you hopefully will, if there's a different way as far as this whole fixed relative absolute to get things in the right position.
Yeah. So as far as the homework goes, we don't want you to use Bootstrap for this homework because your next homework's going to be Bootstrap.
Okay.
Yeah. So like essentially, you're going to do this homework this week. You're going to do it the down and dirty way with CSS and all that stuff. Then next week, we're essentially going to tell you, hey, do the same thing now with Bootstrap. Because we want to show you guys how you can achieve similar results and show you how much easier things are going to be when you have a preset library like Bootstrap to do it for you. But we want to make sure you guys understand like how this moves around. But don't kill yourself on this stuff. I know it's really annoying and hard. To be honest, like most of my students last time, I think they did worst on this homework. Like out of like the entire class, like they did the worst on this homework because it's weird. And then everything we do after the first 2 weeks is like all logic based. So it's just like, you know, we have to teach like the ABCs before we get into, you know, different languages. I would just worry about thinking about how you want to create like containers and section off your content. Like,
and I have trouble with that. I feel like I just don't know
mm-hmm.
when to use what and where to put what for it. You know, when you want to manipulate certain things, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, that's something that comes with like a ton of exposure, and
right.
Yeah, it's not something like I'm not saying that this homework is like designed to not do well in, but it is designed to like get you thinking in like how do you organize content,
right?
You know, that way you can kind of think about like where you're going to end up putting things, because think about like right now we're explicitly putting paragraphs in, like I'm pasting paragraphs in. There's going to be a point where everything's generated dynamically, right? So like, you know, if I call upon the New York Times API and like I need to know that I have my stuff set up where it's going to print into a container and kind of look okay no matter how big, small, with photos, without photos, like, so this is kind of just like saying now we can control the content. So let's get a good grasp of how we can position these things, because in a few weeks we won't be dealing in controlled content. We'll be dealing in variable content, and it gets weird really fast. So don't kill yourself over this stuff, and don't think that if you're struggling with this, don't think it's indicative of like how the entire class is going to go. Because like I know it's really easy to think that way. No, like I know it's really easy to think that way. Like after the first like week and a half, people are like, "What in the absolute hell is happening here?"
Yeah.
It's totally normal. I mean, it was different for me. Like I came in with a strong CSS background, so I was like, "Oh, like I got this. Like I'm all good."
Mm-hmm.
But then I got into week 3 JavaScript, and I got my ass handed to me. So like, But I was different. I came from a reverse background than most of you are coming from. A lot of you guys are coming from like a logical background. I did not. I came from like a design background. So like I already thought in terms of like boxes and stuff like that. So, yeah, I wouldn't like try to get all of your content set up, and then if you want to come for office hours, we can stay after class and stuff and like kind of get you guys on the right path with things too. So I don't think we're like leaving, like I'm not gonna like hanging out to dry here. You guys come in with questions, I'm definitely gonna answer them. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So does anybody have any questions on this one, the positioning one?
Really?
Is everybody?
That helps a lot. Thanks for clearing that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's weird. Trust me, I know it's weird. This stuff is like whacked out. But you're gonna see libraries that like you'll want to utilize stuff like this, and you'll want to know like how to implement it the right way. Even if you're not writing the CSS, you'll want to know like why their CSS library works. So just try to understand. Like if you can understand the whys, that's way more important than understanding the actual words you have to write, in my opinion. Because like the concept will carry over. You'll learn the words over time. Like all these commands you have to write, it just comes with repetition. It comes with just like seeing it, experiencing it, kind of like screwing it up and backing your way out of it. And then, but like once you understand like why you're doing it, it'll become a lot more clear.
If you did margin auto, would that center vertically too?
No, it's actually no, which is really weird. Flexbox gives you the opportunity to like center things vertically. But like you would think that margin auto would do that, but it doesn't. So, but it's also different because it's like because you're not giving things a set height. So yeah. like that's kind of like why it doesn't work as well for heights. Heights are weird. It's a lot easier to control widths with CSS than it is to control heights.
Yeah, height can be infinite. The screen's only so wide.
Exactly. Like you can really like rein in what the width needs to be, but like when it comes to height, honestly, unless you're like you really sticking to your guns on what you need to accomplish, and like that something needs to be a certain height, like typically don't touch it, because it's just weird, and then it gets really weird when you're crossing it over to other browser sizes. Like right now, I'm on a 27-inch iMac, and things look way more awesome than if I put it onto my 13-inch MacBook. So it's hard to account for that when you're using heights. So, yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? Everybody's cool? All right. Well, so all of this is on the repo. So I recommend just like kind of taking a look and studying a little bit more. Other than that, just want to say thanks for coming. Like this is a really good turnout for the first week. So that's awesome. I'm really happy about this. It was a lot harder when I would do these during like really hard weeks, and then 3 people would show up. I'd be like, oh, and then like everybody else would come in the next day and they'd be like really confused. I'm like, oh, well, where the hell were you last night? Like,
watching Netflix or something.
Yeah, I mean they can do both. So we're multitaskers. It's 2018.
This hipster text is the best thing so far.
It is great. Between that and Phil Murray for the Bill Murray filler images, it's great.
And Thundercats.
Well, yeah. Well, Thundercat's also he's a musician now too, so that's why. All right. Well, I guess that's about it for tonight. Thanks for joining me on this wonderful Sunday evening. And so I'll see you. Yeah, I'll see some of you tomorrow night, and I'll see some of you on Tuesday night.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one, guys.